The map showing new coastlines for North America. East Coast, West Coast, Gulf Coast, and the Great Lakes region and the Mississippi Valley. It's a pretty scary map. How many people have seen that map? Okay, I know quite a few of you have. It's a pretty scary map. Let's start at Maine, at the Canadian border. The U.S. Navy says, not John Moore, the U.S. Navy says the East Coast will take damage up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. Everything 400 feet above sea level and lower will be underwater. The Blue Ridge Parkway is a very scenic road. It runs north-south on the east side of the Appalachian Mountains. Much of it is 100 miles from the Atlantic Ocean. Going down the coast to Florida, most of Florida is going to be gone. The highest point in Florida is 55 feet above sea level, and that's on the mainland, it's not on the isthmus. I've driven past some construction sites in Florida, and you see these backhoes working. It's all sand. I don't know how they build anything down there. I guess if you put piers down deep enough, you eventually hit some rock. Going up the Gulf Coast, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas. Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana are going to lose about half their real estate to the oceans. Texas will take damage about 100 miles inland. I do private consultations. I was at a client's house about 100 miles in Texas, 100 miles from the coast. I'm getting out of the truck. I look down and I say, this used to be under the ocean. It's all sand. He's 100 miles from the Gulf Coast. It's very easy in much of Texas, within 100 miles of the Gulf Coast, to find seashells right there on the ground. California, or Oregon, Washington will take damage 50 to 100 miles inland. It gets steeper a little bit quicker on the west coast. The Pacific Northwest, the geologists refer to it as a geological nightmare. I was talking to a man who lives in the Cascade Mountains. I said, you know, sir, those aren't mountains. He says, yeah, I know, John, they're all volcanoes. The Cascade Mountains are not mountains, they're volcanoes, all of them. The Mississippi River Valley, which is not far from here, we got the Missouri River in walking distance. In fact, what was it like here in 1993? Was this underwater?
Most likely.
It backed up, yeah, I thought it probably did. I see the utility boxes around here 5-6 feet off the ground, and they do that for a reason. Where the Mississippi River joins the Gulf of Mexico will be about where the Arkansas-Louisiana state line is now. That's according to the U.S. Navy. The Mississippi River itself will be 50 to 100 miles wide, 100 feet deep, effectively cutting the United States in two. Anybody hear of the United States Northern Command, U.S. Northcom? Okay, it's about, what, 7, 8 years old now? Beginning about 3 years ago, they started splitting U.S. Northcom east-west at the Mississippi River. They're not telling the senior NCOs or the officers why. They're just saying, split everything, logistics, the men, the equipment, everything, east-west at the Mississippi River. They're doing that for a reason, too, because they have no choice. And it's a lot easier to do it now than it would be at some future date. You don't have bridges across a river 100 miles wide or 50 miles wide. You simply don't do that. Here's some simple Google searches. Almost everybody here, I'm sure, has internet access. These things have been happening right in front of our eyes for 7, 8 years now. Here's one Google search, CIA and the word Denver. And you'll find the CIA's press releases that beginning in 2005, they started moving from Langley, Virginia to Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City. Another Google search, NSA and the word Denver. Same thing, press releases going back to 2005, National Security Agency, which we finally call no such agency, moving from Fort Meade, Maryland to Denver, and Fort Meade, Maryland to Utah, and Fort Meade, Maryland to Augusta, Georgia. They're really spreading out. The new capital of the United States will be Denver, Colorado. The backup capital for the eastern side of the country will be Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta is the highest altitude major city east of the Mississippi River. Most of us here have had jobs, or still have jobs. You know, ladies and gentlemen, if you file a grievance against your employer, it's like suing your boss. It's not really career enhancing, right? Are you on the same page with me? Okay. The scientists in the EPA, they filed grievances against their employer saying, gentlemen, when you shut down these 4 libraries, which happened in the summer of 2008, they shut down all 4 of the EPA libraries. It's the largest English language collection of scientific material on the planet. They shut down all 4 of them. The grievances said, gentlemen, you've cut us off from what we need to keep America safe. The EPA's response was, we did this as a cost-saving measure. Now, if there's one federal agency that's fairly honest, it's the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. They came back and said, no, it costs more to shut down these 4 libraries than to keep them open. So where do they go? Well, they're not talking, but I'm pretty sure they went to high ground. They're not going to put that collection at risk. They're simply not going to do it. Now, a few years ago, after 9/11/01, we had this anthrax problem where some nutcase was mailing anthrax to various people, and we all heard about anthrax. The U.S. government has a facility where they study really fun stuff like anthrax and foot and mouth disease. Now, Greg, if you and I were going to do this, would we put it on an island in the Atlantic Ocean? Would that be a smart thing to do, to put the anthrax and the foot and mouth disease when you're going to study it on an island in the Atlantic Ocean? Of course it would, and that's exactly what they did half a century ago. Plum Island, off the coast of New York, in the Atlantic Ocean. You can do a Google search. There's Google search, there's Google Images, there's Google Video. Go to Google Images. Go to Google Images and put Plum Island in there, and you can see photographs, aerial photographs of Plum Island. It looks like a 200-acre golf course. And the publicly stated reason for moving from Plum Island is we've run out of space. You know, these same images show the buildings. And 200 acres. I mean, how big is this field here we're sitting in? Is it close to 200 acres? Anybody want to guess? Okay. Well, regardless. You look at the Google image, the satellite photograph of Plum Island. You can see 3 or 4 buildings there and a lot of green space. No, they haven't run out of space, not at all. And where are they moving it to? Where you worked as a state trooper. They're moving the most dangerous thing that you can imagine to the most productive agricultural real estate on the planet, Kansas. That's really smart. That's incredibly smart, isn't it? I've determined to my own satisfaction, ladies and gentlemen, that this is just as real can be. Don't ask me for a date. We'll talk about dating later on. When I was interviewing my friends, the Navy veteran and the other Navy veterans, in the fall of 2005, I started writing a paper. It was published in January 2006. The title of it is No Need for Panic. Anybody here got a copy of it and read it? A few? Okay. No Need for Panic. Published January 2006. In that paper, I state that according to the scientists at the time, the Gulf Stream had lost about 35% of its mass and velocity. And the scientists at the time were estimating 5 to 20 years in the future, it would stop. This one event by itself is going to change everything. This one event by itself will change everything. Let's talk about the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is a body of warm water. In fact, Benjamin Franklin named the Gulf Stream. And 200 years ago, they thought that all these currents were kind of separate and doing their own thing. It turns out they're all connected. All the streams, all the ocean currents are connected. There's something called the Gulf Loop Current, which is in the Gulf of Mexico. It comes out of the Gulf of Mexico between Cuba and Florida, joins up with the water out of the Caribbean, and starts going north along the coast of Florida, past Georgia, up past South Carolina. It gets to about Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and starts going north by northeast. More like east by northeast, excuse me. It used to go all the way up to Long Island before it started going east by northeast. The U.S. Navy, every 24 hours, publishes a brand new map showing the sea surface temperatures of all the oceans on the planet. You go to my website, thelibertyman.com, you can read the article I wrote there, No Need for Panic. I got the link for the Navy website. I'm working with my local mayor, chief of police, fire chief, head of the paramedics, and some community organizers on preparedness. And the mayor said the other day, John, I don't quite buy this stuff. And I said, well, Mr. Mayor, the United States Navy is not exactly known for black helicopter conspiracy theories, are they? You go to the Navy website and you look yourself. You can see the Gulf Stream coming up Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. It starts to go east by northeast. And it kind of meanders around and stops a few hundred miles out. It did that on June 12th, 2010. The third week of July this past year, 2010, I was put in contact by one of my research team with Dr. Luiziani Zangari, a PhD scientist working in Italy. He's working with other scientists in North America and in Europe, exclusively on the Gulf Stream these past 11 years. At the time, at the beginning of the third week in July, Dr. Zangari said, "We think it may have stopped, we're doing more calculations." It was about 7 or 8 days later he confirmed that, in fact, on June 12th, 2010, the Gulf Stream had stopped. Things started getting really wacky with the weather right after that. Here's a quote from Dr. Zangari. Now, up until I heard this quote, my opinion of the Gulf Stream was pretty similar to most people. I thought the Gulf Stream affected the eastern seaboard of the United States, England, Ireland, Scotland, Western Europe. Most people believe that have any knowledge of weather. It turned out I was completely wrong. Here's the quote from Dr. Zangari. "The Gulf Stream is the pacemaker of the climate of the planet." And here's the reason why. There's something else called the jet stream. 5 miles up from where you're sitting, sir, 5 miles up is wind, 200 miles an hour. It's called the jet stream. It's there all 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The jet stream. The Gulf Stream was a regulating factor for the jet stream. It regulated it, caused the jet stream to move in a predictable fashion. That's very important for agriculture. We're in the middle of a cornfield here. One year it's corn and next it's soybeans. This is farm country. If you're growing grains, you can have a certain amount of precipitation. You can have a certain, not too high, not too low. You can have certain temperatures, not too high, not too low. Within those parameters, you can grow a really nice crop and have a good yield. You start getting too much precipitation or too little, too high of temperatures or too low, you start losing your yield to the point where diesel fuel costs more than the harvest, and you just let it rot in the field. We're already seeing that. This past fall, 2010, Russia announced publicly that they would not honor grain futures contracts that they'd already sold. You know, ladies and gentlemen, that's not an act of war, but it's about an inch away. That's a very serious international law matter. The Ukraine did the same thing. And quite frankly, it's the right thing to do, is take care of your own people. And they did do the right thing. Grain growing areas planet-wide are at extreme risk right now. This past summer of 2010, Moscow had the hottest summer since they've been keeping records. They've got weather records in Moscow going back 1,000 years. There aren't many places on the planet that have that. You get west of the Mississippi, you rarely find temperature records, weather records going back past the 1880s or 1890s, about 110, 120 years or so. Going east to the East Coast, you find weather records going back a little bit farther. 1,000 years worth of weather records. This past winter, the winter of 2010, 2011, Moscow had the coldest winter in 1,000 years. One extreme to the other. Agriculture, farmers need predictability to be able to make the investment in the seed, and the fertilizer, and the diesel fuel, and all the rest that they need before they put that crop in the ground. They're losing that predictability. North America has been, so far, fairly resilient. We've got the beginning of what might be a Dust Bowl situation down around Oklahoma and western Kansas. That remains to be seen. A friend of mine grows, her family business is growing wheat in western Kansas. The winter wheat crop was at great risk the last time I talked to her. They weren't sure they were even going to get a harvest. I teach concealed carry training. That's where I met many of these Navy veterans. My home is down in Crawford County, about a 2-hour drive from here. I do these concealed carry classes about once a month. Every class from August of '08 until January of '09, I had at least one Navy veteran, each one of whom was either at the classified briefing or had been told about it by a buddy in the Navy. each one of whom moved to the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of what they learned in the classified briefings. One of the men who bought the original edition of my DVD, he was a Navy veteran, is a Navy veteran, excuse me, living up in Montana. In 1979, he was just a young sailor stationed in New Orleans, and he gets an assignment to set up a briefing room for a bunch of admirals. The tables, the chairs, the sound system, lights, and so forth. And he sees a map on the wall. He's not in the briefing, he's just a 25-year-old sailor. He's not going to be in there with these admirals. He said, John, when these admirals showed up, and he said, by the way, admirals don't do weekend briefings. He said, when the admirals showed up, they're all slapping each other on the back, smoking cigars, how's the wife, how's the kid, making jokes. He said when they left the briefing a few hours later, they all looked like their puppy dogs had died. He said, John, I saw that map in 1979. It's 2009 now. I did not know for 30 years what that map meant until I saw your DVD. Now I know why those men all looked like their puppy dogs had died. They just looked at the end of the world, staring them in the face. As you know from hearing my bio, I investigate murders. I investigated my first murder in the fall of 1973. I wrapped up my most recent homicide investigation about a year ago. And Greg, as a defense investigator, when I go looking for a murder suspect, I'm by myself with no backup. No Motorola, call for help. We're having a fundraiser for one of my clients charged with murder, who was innocent, by the way. A real travesty, but I'm not going to go into that story today. Travesty of justice. The sponsoring group was the Western Cherokee Nation. This is in September 2008. September 2008. I see a man walking around. He's got this official-looking ID badge on. It says, Tim Spencer, Director of Preparedness, Western Cherokee Nation. So I introduced myself. Never met this man before in my life. I just got my new DVD from the duplicator just days before. I said, Tim, I got something I need you to look at. So I give him a copy. He gets back with me a week later. And he says, John, I've seen your map. I said, really? He says, yeah. I was in the Navy Submarine Corps. I said, I didn't know that. He says, I was in New Orleans doing classified work for the Navy in 1985, and I saw your map. Well, he and I and his wife, we've become friends since then. They were in one of my pistol classes about a year after that, maybe 8 or 9 months, doesn't matter. His wife's name's Lori, very lovely lady. He and Lori are both from Central Florida, and they're both Cherokee Indians. In fact, Tim was an adult before he knew you couldn't make as much whiskey as you wanted without a license. But that's the way they do things in Central Florida back in the swamp. Anyway, we're having lunch, and his wife Lori says the following to me. She says, John, I don't like cold weather, I don't like snow, I don't even like Missouri, but we're here because of that map. We're here because of that map. When Tim retired from the Navy, they picked the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of the map. That's why they're here. That was 25 years ago. Tim's gone public with me when the rest of these Navy veterans could not. The rest of these Navy veterans have pensions, and they're not going to put their pension at risk to talk to you folks. They're not going to do that. Tim has a different situation. When he reported for his first submarine duty with 2 other men, the captain said, well, gentlemen, we don't have bunks for you. You're going to have to string up hammocks between the nuclear warheads of the Polaris missiles. Don't worry, no radiation. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, all 3 men will be irradiated. Tim Spencer suffers from severe radiation poisoning, and he has disability. He does not have a pension. They can't take his disability away from him, so he's agreed to go public with me. And he appears on my DVD with me being interviewed. God bless you, Tim Spencer. With something this important, Greg, you need a live eyewitness. You need a first-hand witness, not some investigator like myself telling you about people I talked to. You need a first-hand witness. It's too important not to have that. And that's what we got finally, live on DVD. The fall of 2005, I met the second submarine veteran. He didn't serve with the U.S. Navy. He was an intelligence officer from another service. I got to protect his identity here. I was doing a speaking engagement down in Rolla, Missouri on the topic of terrorism. The professor is a friend of mine, and so we finished talking to the college students about terrorism, and we go to a local pizza place there in Rolla, Missouri. We're sitting at a four-top table. The intelligence officer's directly across from me, his wife sitting next to me, and my friend the professor's over here. Once I found out he did a 3-year tour of duty in the U.S. Navy Submarine Corps, I had to ask him the question, because I never met this man before in my life. I may never see him again. I asked him the question, tell me what you know about rising ocean levels. Before he can speak up, his wife speaks up. She says, John, our last duty assignment is at the Pentagon. We've lived all over the planet, typical military family. We had to pick a place to retire. We picked the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks because of rising ocean levels. Well, bingo, I knew I had my second witness. What a homicide detective does is two things: locate witnesses and take statements. That's what we do. That's what we do. We locate witnesses, we take statements. I am very, very good at doing both. So I made a lunch appointment with him the following week to meet him at Steak and Shake and take his statement. He agreed to talk with me, and he was the second man to help me recreate the Navy classified map. The third veteran, he was an officer in the U.S. Navy Submarine Corps, one of my pistol students. I can use his name because he's now passed on to his reward, dying of cancer. Cancer is pretty epidemic among Navy veterans for obvious reasons. They're around way too much radiation, way too long. Steve Canfield was his name. So I met him in his pistol class, and I make a lunch appointment with him for the following week, and we get together, and he says, John, I got a problem. I signed a 5-year non-disclose agreement. I've only been out of the Navy 3 years. If I tell you what I know, it could cost me my pension. I said, okay, Steve, can you blink your eyes once for yes and twice for no? That way you won't be talking to me. And he smiled and said, yeah. And we went ahead and had our conversation. He went ahead and talked to me. And he was the third man to help me revise and recreate the Navy classified map.